They marched believing they were fighting for Christ, but carried the secrets of kings, the debts of bankers, and the vanities of court. Nicopolis was not just a defeat. It was the crusade that never truly existed, and the mask of faith fell before the blood. 4th century. A fragmented Christendom struggled to reclaim its lost glory as kings raised banners with the Red Cross to summon one last holy war. But behind the fiery sermons, something darker stirred. Hidden interests, secret pacts, and a faith used as currency of power. The Crusade of Nicopolis in 1396 promised to be the great triumph against the Ottomans, but became the symbol of a collective lie. Today, we will uncover why this crusade, in fact, never happened. And before we continue, I need you. Subscribe now to the channel Faith and Power, turn on notifications, and comment where you're watching from. Your presence strengthens this community that seeks light in the shadows of history. The year was 1396. Europe bled from within. Since the disaster of the Black Death and the scars of the 100 Years' War, Christendom looked like a cracked castle held together only by memories of a distant glory. Rome no longer spoke with one voice. The Great Western Schism had split Peter's throne between two rival popes, one in Avignon, the other in Rome, each claiming to be the true representative of Christ. The people looked to the heavens and wondered, where is God? When even the shepherds of the church wage war against each other. It was in this atmosphere of spiritual confusion and political fragility that a new crusade was proclaimed. The Ottoman Sultan Bayezid I, the lightning bolt, was advancing along the Danube, threatening Hungary, Bulgaria, and inevitably Western Europe itself. Nobles feared that Constantinople would only be the first domino in an irreversible collapse. Preachers stirred crowds in cathedrals, crying out, "If Jerusalem is lost, then at least Europe cannot fall before the Islamic crescent." And thus was born the call of Nicopolis. But it was a strange call. Spirituality seemed like the backdrop. Ambition was the true conductor. The Duke of Burgundy saw in it an opportunity for dynastic prestige. French knights longed for glorious adventures that could cleanse the shame of failed battles against England. Italian merchants envisioned new trade routes to expand their profits. Even the Hungarian crown had a clear goal, securing survival against Ottoman fury. When messengers traveled through the cities of France, Germany, and Italy, the word crusade sounded like a heavenly trumpet. Yet in practice it was closer to an earthly contract. Young nobles saw in this march a chance to win titles, gold, and even wives from distant kingdoms. The indulgence preached by the church, full forgiveness of sins for those who joined, was the perfect lure for restless hearts, tormented by wars and unconfessed sins. And yet, a few noticed the contradiction. How could one fight for Christ if Christ's own representatives were at war with each other? How could one wear the cross on his chest when the cross had already been turned into a political banner? But those dissenting voices were drowned by the collective enthusiasm. The courts of Europe dressed themselves in spectacle. Feasts, banquets, and tournaments celebrated the new crusade. Chroniclers tell of knights flaunting lavish armor adorned with golden crests. Swords forged especially for the expedition were displayed like relics of future glory. It was as if Christendom were staging a grand theatrical play where each actor sought his own applause, but few cared about the story itself. And here lies the paradox. While the sermons spoke of sacrifice and devotion, the march that was forming looked more like a show of vanity than a sacred pilgrimage. Like a broken mirror, Christendom reflected fragments of faith mixed with cracks of pride and greed. Hungary became the rallying point. Sigismund, the young Hungarian king, desperately pleaded for help. He saw his crown threatened not only by the Ottomans, but also by internal rivals. For him, the crusade was survival, not just spiritual, but political. And it was at the crossroads of these interests that the Crusader army began to rise, high-born French knights, followed by men from Burgundy, Italians, Germans, Hungarians, and even English volunteers. Each group marched carrying not only swords, but also rivalries. Many did not speak the same language, did not share the same customs, and scarcely trusted one another. The only glue that bound them was the name of Christ, yet even that name was pronounced with different intentions in every heart. Chroniclers tell that, at departure, it seemed a triumphal procession. Crowds cheered in the cities, priests blessed. The troops and the red crosses sewn onto their cloaks shone under the sun. Yet there was something unsettling in the eyes of certain silent observers, as if they sensed that this would not be the crusade of victory, but of disillusion. For deep down, the true enemy was already hidden within Christendom's heart. Vanity, masked as faith, gold disguised as devotion. The march to Nicopolis began not only against Bayezid, but against Christendom's own reflection in the mirror. And what awaited them on the Danube would not only be the clash of armies, but the unveiling of an uncomfortable secret, that perhaps this crusade had never really existed. The procession of knights crossed Europe's dusty roads like a triumphal parade. From the Loire Valley to the banks of the Rhine, through the golden fields of Italy, entire cities crowded to witness the spectacle. Drums thundered, trumpets echoed, and children ran after banners adorned with the Red Cross. The scene seemed drawn from a warrior psalm. Christendom united, marching against the enemy of the faith. But beneath the gleam of steel, something less noble was concealed. The Crusade of Nicopolis was not carried solely by men of faith. It was weighed down by debts, pacts, and interests. Every French knight who departed left behind a web of creditors. Many had sold lands, mortgaged castles, and taken loans from Florentine and Genoese bankers. Forgiveness of sins was preached as a divine reward, but gold was the earthly condition to purchase the right to fight. A Burgundian chronicler noted, "These men marched not only to win victories, but to pay debts." At the head of this multitude of hopes and vanities came the pride of French chivalry. Young nobles, sons of powerful houses, saw the expedition as a stage for consecration. For them, it was not enough to win. They had to shine. Stories are told of duels fought during the journey itself, staged only to display skill. Arrogance and blind confidence prevailed. A veteran of the 100 Years' War is said to have warned, "Courage is a blade. It may shine, but it can also cut its owner." Few listened. King Sigismund of Hungary, host of the campaign, saw matters differently. For him, there was no room for spectacle. Hungary was the wall before the Ottoman advance. His spies brought alarming reports. Bayezid was not marching alone. Auxiliary troops from Anatolia and Serbian cavalry formed a storm that could engulf any careless army. Sigismund begged for discipline. But how could one impose discipline on foreign knights, used to obeying only the pride of their nobility? Along the road, tensions among allies grew. The French scorned the Hungarians, calling them barbarians. Burgundians mocked the Italians, accusing them of being merchants disguised as soldiers. The cross on their chests did not erase centuries of rivalry between kingdoms. Each group marched side by side, but in truth they walked apart. And there was yet another element: the merchants. Venice and Genoa, eternal rivals in the Mediterranean, saw in the Crusade a chance to expand their domains. Genoese ships transported knights and weapons. Venetian bankers offered credit disguised as devotion. Christ was invoked from pulpits. But in taverns, men spoke of interest rates, contracts, and trade routes. When the army crossed the Danube, the spectacle gave way to shadow. The vastness of the Hungarian frontier revealed devastated villages, burned churches, abandoned fields. Women wept at their doors, begging for protection. Here, reality broke in like thunder. This was not a distant war. The Crusade was marching through a land already torn by fear. Still, the French knights insisted on celebrating. Banquets were organized in the midst of the campaign. Hunts and tournaments continued even as villages burned nearby. The contrast was cruel. Peasants begged for bread, while nobles toasted with wines carried in luxurious barrels. The spirit of penitence seemed replaced by a marketplace of vanity. Yet there were also those who remained silent, observing. Simple men, soldiers without crests, peasants armed only with improvised spears. They marched because they truly believed the crusade was the defense of the faith, the last chance to protect their children from Islamic rule. While nobles competed for glory, these men bore on their backs the weight of survival. And the road to Nicopolis seemed more and more like a mirror reflecting Christendom's contradictions. A cracked mirror where sincere faith and unbridled ambition blended, creating a distorted image of what a holy war was meant to be. Sigismund tried to warn the commanders. Bayezid was cunning, swift, relentless. He could not be underestimated. He urged them to wait for reinforcements, plan sieges, act with caution. But the French, inflamed by songs of glory, mocked prudence. For them, victory was an inevitable destiny. And in this clash between caution and arrogance, the future was already being written. With every step, they drew closer to Nicopolis. With every day, they walked deeper into an invisible trap. They still believed they marched in the name of the cross. But in truth, they carried within them the weight of vanities that would soon be crushed beneath the thunder of Ottoman horses. And on the horizon, the walls of Nicopolis already rose like a final stage. Yet none imagined that there, on the banks of the Danube, the crusade would reveal its darkest face. The walls of Nicopolis rose before the Christian army like a promise of glory. The city, set on the banks of the Danube, was a strategic key in the heart of Bulgaria. Whoever held it controlled not only trade routes, but also the fate of the war between Crusaders and Ottomans. When the first banners appeared on the horizon, soldiers shouted with joy. It seemed that triumph was near. The siege began with haste and impatience. The Hungarians advised discipline, cut off supplies, let hunger consume the defenders, avoid direct assaults. But the French, led by nobles hungry for glory, demanded immediate action. To them, waiting was cowardice. Armed with siege machines, they hurled themselves against the walls. Days dragged on in futile attacks, while arrows and stones cut down soldiers. Impatience turned into fury. Inside the city, despair grew. Chroniclers tell of women and children praying, monks carrying relics through the streets, begging God to save Nicopolis. But the defenders knew they were not alone. Bayezid, the lightning sultan, was already marching toward the siege with relentless speed. His cavalry was feared for its fierce discipline and its ability to endure endless journeys without rest. Meanwhile, among the Christians, rivalries reached their peak. The French mocked Sigismund's counsel. "Let no barbarian king teach us how to wage war," they scoffed, drinking wine in the midst of the siege. Burgundian knights flaunted lavish banners, more concerned with personal honor than with strategy. Sigismund insisted, "Bayezid will come with an army larger than you can imagine. We must wait. We must unite our strength." But his words were drowned in laughter and songs of premature victory. Then the ground shook. First, a cloud of dust on the horizon. Then, the distant beat of drums. The sun flashed against the armor of thousands of Ottoman horsemen. The lightning had arrived. Bayezid did not come alone. He brought reinforcements from Anatolian vassals, mounted archers, and a powerful reserve of Serbian troops led by Stefan Lazarevich, his Christian ally. It was a cruel paradox, a crusade against Islam facing not only Muslims, but Christians fighting beneath the Ottoman banner. Sigismund pleaded for caution. He knew the terrain was treacherous, that the Ottomans would wait for the fatal mistake. His strategy was clear: hold the infantry in front, keep the heavy cavalry for the decisive blow. But the French refused to listen. "Honor demands that we be the first," they declared. Pride spoke louder than reason. On the decisive morning, the sun gilded the hills of the Danube. French trumpets announced the charge. Hundreds of knights, armor gleaming, galloped toward the Ottoman lines. It was a scene of epic grandeur, banners streaming, lances raised, war cries echoing like thunder. The first impact was devastating. The forward Ottoman units were crushed beneath the weight of heavy cavalry. For a moment, the Crusaders believed victory was inevitable, but Bayezid had foreseen every step. His first ranks were bait. As the French advanced in disorder, chasing enemies who retreated deliberately, the ground revealed its trap. The charge drew them into narrow hills where hidden Ottoman archers rained arrows. Knights fell, horses collapsed, formations shattered. And then the Ottoman reserve struck. Stefan Lazarevich, at the head of the Serbian cavalry, launched into the exhausted Crusaders. The clash was brutal. What had been glory turned into slaughter. Knights, trapped in their heavy armor, fell helplessly. The French cavalry, pride of Christendom, became an easy target. From above, Sigismund watched in horror. His strategy had been ignored. He tried to rally Hungarian and Wallachian troops, but it was too late. Bayezid advanced with ruthless discipline, crushing resistance after resistance. The field of Nicopolis became a graveyard. The stench of blood, the cries of the wounded, the blare of Ottoman trumpets filled the air like a requiem. By nightfall, the defeat was complete. Thousands of Christians lay dead or captured. Bayezid, in triumph, ordered the execution of hundreds of prisoners, sparing only the richest nobles for ransom. The crusade that had begun as a spectacle of glory ended in unspeakable horror. Nicopolis was not merely a military defeat. It was the revelation that Christendom had fought against itself. Pride, vanity, and division had done more harm than Ottoman lances. And in the silence of night, among the scattered corpses, echoed the haunting question: where was the cross they had sworn to defend? After Nicopolis, the dust did not cover only corpses, but also uncomfortable truths. The official narrative spoke of defeat before Islam, but behind the blood lay a darker story. The crusade, proclaimed as an act of faith, revealed itself as a piece carefully moved on the board of secular interests. The first motive was gold. Bankers from Florence and Genoa financed knights, expecting multiplied returns in plunder and ransoms. Papal indulgences themselves worked as spiritual currency that drew multitudes. When men mortgaged castles and pawned harvests to embark on the crusade, they forged invisible chains binding them more to the world than to heaven. The blood shed at Nicopolis was not only for the cross, it was for the balance of debts. The second motive was the schism. In 1396, Christendom was split between two rival popes. Each faction sought to prove its legitimacy, and supporting a crusade was a way to gain political prestige. It was as if the very body of the church had thrown soldiers into the abyss just so a throne in Avignon or in Rome could claim, "God is with us." Nicopolis was not only a battlefield between Christians and Muslims, but also a stage for internal rivalry disguised as devotion. The third motive was the Danube. That frontier was not merely military, but economic. To control the river was to control routes of wine, grain, salt, and precious metals. Hungary knew it, Venice and Genoa knew it, and Bayezid knew it too. The crusade was not solely a spiritual defense. It was a struggle for the economic lifeline of Eastern Europe. The banner of the cross concealed commercial maps carefully drawn in secret councils. Records survive of letters exchanged between French nobles, mentioning expected rewards even before the campaign began. They spoke not only of victory over infidels, but of fiefs, incomes, and titles. For many, the cross was a golden ticket to social ascent. Serving Christ was a convenient slogan, but their hearts beat for personal glory. Sigismund understood this game better than anyone. For him, Nicopolis was political survival. A young king surrounded by rivals, he needed victories to consolidate his throne. The Crusade gave him a chance to transform a fragile kingdom into the bastion of Christendom. But by opening his gates to foreign nobles, he invited their vices as well. The banquet of vanities swallowed his prudence, and Bayezid, the lightning sultan, also played on multiple fronts. By defeating the Crusaders, he not only expanded his dominion, but sent a clear message. Europe was divided, vulnerable, prisoner of its own arrogance. His alliance with Serbian knights showed that religion was only one element of war. The true engine was power. Thus, the Crusade of Nicopolis exposed a disturbing secret. There was no single crusade. There were many crusades, intertwined, conflicting. The Crusade of bankers, driven by profit. The Crusade of popes, driven by prestige. The Crusade of nobles, driven by honor and ambition. The Crusade of kings, driven by survival. And the Crusade of the simple, driven by sincere faith and desperate hope. On the field of Nicopolis, all these currents collided and canceled each other out. That is why many later chroniclers preferred silence. To tell the truth was to expose the wound. It was easier to say that God allowed defeat to punish sins than to admit that the crusade itself had been born corrupted. Like an uncomfortable confession, the story was pushed to the margins of memory. Yet documents remain. Letters, diaries, and accounts from ambassadors show that Nicopolis was never just a clash between Christians and Muslims. It was a theater where masks fell. And when the mask fell, it revealed the face of Christendom, divided, corroded, incapable of fighting as one. This is the true motive behind it. Nicopolis did not fail only because Bayezid was faster, more cunning. Nicopolis failed because, at its core, it was already defeated before it began. The cross they carried was made of gilded wood, but hollow inside. And the question still echoes, unsettling. When we proclaim that we fight for God, are we not many times fighting only for ourselves? The defeat at Nicopolis spread through Europe like a cold wind snuffing out torches in the night. The courts that had once celebrated tournaments in honor of the crusade now fell silent in shame. The troubadours who had sung hymns of victory were forced to compose laments. French pride turned into mourning, Hungary into despair, Christendom as a whole into bewilderment. The survivors returned mutilated not only in body, but in soul. Chroniclers describe knights marching home without crests, without banners, bowed like beggars. Those who had left dreaming of glory returned, carrying only disgrace. Many were forced to sell lands to pay ransoms for captured comrades. The gold they had hoped to seize had turned into even greater debt. In the cities, rumors spread. Had God abandoned Christendom? Or had Christendom abandoned God? Homilies tried to explain. Some preachers declared that the defeat was punishment for lust and pride. Others said it was God's judgment for the very schism dividing the church. But few dared admit the simplest truth: the crusade had been built on vanity. Meanwhile, Bayezid rejoiced. The victory at Nicopolis cemented his title as the lightning bolt. His name echoed like thunder through the courts of Eastern Europe. He had not only won a battle, he had exposed Europe's entrails, revealing its division and fragility. His triumph filled even Constantinople with dread, its walls seeming like sand before the Ottoman storm. For Christendom, the impact was devastating. Nicopolis was not only a military defeat, it was the end of an era. Since the First Crusade, Europe had believed it could march united under the banner of faith. In 1396, that myth collapsed. The very idea of crusade, once able to rally multitudes, became an uncomfortable memory. No king dared repeat the error so soon. In Burgundy, the duke who had dreamed of dynastic prestige saw his house stained. In France, the nobility plunged into internal rivalries. In Venice and Genoa, merchants mourned the failure of promised trade routes. For Sigismund, king of Hungary, Nicopolis was a wound that never healed. He survived the battle but bore forever the stigma of being host to disaster. And the common people? Hungarian and Wallachian peasants who had believed they were marching to defend the faith returned to devastated fields. Many never again trusted nobles who had worn the cross as a disguise. Among monks and preachers, disillusion grew. The word crusade no longer inflamed hearts. It evoked memories of arrogance and defeat. Yet Nicopolis was not only silence, it was also seed. Decades later, when new enemies threatened, the memory of the tragedy served as a warning. The lesson echoed. Faith without discipline is ruin. Courage without humility is suicide. A cross without truth is only hollow wood. The chroniclers who dared to write of 1396 used somber tones. One declared, "Christendom carried the cross to Nicopolis, but left Christ behind." Another recorded, "We were not defeated by the Turks, but by ourselves." These words, buried in forgotten manuscripts, may be the truest epitaph of that expedition. And yet the question lingers. What if Sigismund's counsel had been heeded? What if the French had set aside their pride? Would Nicopolis have been a victory? Or was the crusade doomed from the first sermon, born from the womb of vanity? The domino effect was clear. After 1396, Europe grew hesitant. Crusading fervor would never be the same. The dream of a Christendom united in arms evaporated. The Ottoman advance continued, relentless, to the walls of Constantinople. And when the city finally fell in 1453, many remembered Nicopolis, the crusade that had promised to save Europe, but had never truly happened. And perhaps here lies the most unsettling lesson. The greatest defeat was not on the battlefield, but in the hearts of men. Nicopolis showed that faith can be used as a mask, that the cross can be wielded as an empty sword. And when that happens, the enemy does not need to win. The defeat is already sealed before the first blow is struck. Thus ended the crusade that never existed. Not in triumph, but in silence. Not in glory, but in shame. And that silence, still, echoes through the corridors of history, reminding us that the greatest battle of Christianity was never against the Ottoman crescent, but against the shadow dwelling within its own soul. The Crusade of Nicopolis was not merely a lost military episode buried in the mists of the 14th century. It was a broken mirror in which Christendom looked at itself and disliked what it saw. The external enemy was real, yes, but the collapse was born within: pride, vanity, disunity. The banner of the cross, meant to unite, became a flag of conflicting interests. And so the crusade crumbled before the first clash of swords. Historians such as Jean Froissart wrote that the French fought with the courage of lions, but the wisdom of children. Harsh words, yet perhaps just. Nicopolis revealed that courage without humility becomes suicide. That faith without truth turns into an empty spectacle. That the cross without Christ is nothing but painted wood. And yet, this failure carries a message for us today. Because the temptation to use faith as a disguise for ambition did not die with the knights of 1396. It still echoes in palaces, pulpits, and even in ordinary hearts. The question of Nicopolis still haunts us. When we proclaim to fight for God, are we truly fighting for Him or only for ourselves? Perhaps that is the most unsettling lesson. Nicopolis was never a true crusade. It was a performance, a theater where each actor sought applause for himself. And that is why it remains alive in our memory, because it shows how even the greatest cause can be corrupted when the heart bows before pride. If this story spoke to you, subscribe now to the channel Faith and Power. Here, we continue to unveil the forgotten secrets of faith and history, exposing alliances, betrayals, and dilemmas that shape the world we live in today. And before you leave, tell me in the comments, where are you watching this story from? Because the journey of faith and power continues, and your voice is part of it.